Yes, I'm ready to go.
We're ready.
My name is Ray Emil Kapaun. I am the no, I'm not. My Father Emil was my uncle. Oh yeah, Father Emil was a very exceptional man, exceptional priest, an exceptional soldier. Everything that he did, he led by example. Everything on the battlefield, everything in his life was led by example. He never was a type of person that would preach to anybody as far as how their faith was or how their belief was. Everything he did, he would do by what he showed, by the way he was. He was a very unselfish person, a very devout person, devoted to his faith, devoted to his country, devoted to the soldiers that he fought beside, and devoted to the guys in the POW camp that he fought with beside and trying to get out of. Just a very exceptional person. Yes, it was during one of the battles in Korea, the Battle of Unsan, when their camp was being overrun and the placement that they were at. And what ended up happening is there was a lot of wounded on the field. The Chinese had joined in, and camp was being overrun, and they were told to retreat. But Father Emil, he could not leave the guys on the battlefield. It was just, there was no way he was going to be able to leave the wounded guys behind, because he knew what was going to happen to them. He knew that their odds of getting out of that was going to be impossible. And even though he was told not to, he went back and he stayed with the wounded guys. He had to tend them. And he knew when he went there, he knew what was going to happen when he went back for those guys. He knew that the very great possibility that they were going to be captured. And indeed they were. And you know, one of the great stories out of that was Herbert Miller, who had an ankle that was shot up and he couldn't move, and was one of the wounded that happened to be there, was laying on the ground. And Father Emil had actually been captured at the time, was being held by the captors, but Herbert Miller was laying on the ground, and one of the Chinese soldiers had came up to him and put a rifle to his head and was getting ready to pull the trigger. And Father Emil walks away from the guys who were around him, from his own captors, just walks away from them, walks up to where Herbert Miller was, pushes the out of the way, pushes the guy out of the way, makes sure that he isn't going to shoot him, and picks up Herbert Miller and just walks away without any regard to anything. And that's the type of man he was. I mean, that's the type of man that the POW saw there in the camp. That's the type of man that they came and talked about when they came back from there. No, he did not. He actually, how he ended up getting injured while he was in the camp, he was out looking for some kind of a utensil that he could make or something he could find to put water in, and everything in the camp. I mean, it was a horrible situation that they were in. I mean, they slept on the ground that was frozen, and it was always below zero in the wintertime. Barely had any food to eat. Then hardly had anything to drink. And Father Emil was out scrounging around to see what he could find, you know, kind of doing what he learned on the farm and how he learned to do things. You know, his typical way of trying to solve a problem. Just like, you know, one of the great stories about on the farm was when his mom and dad had to go into a town in Marion, which is about 10 miles away, and they left Father Emil at home to do the chores, and he was there by himself because my dad was still too small. And one of the chores he had to do was he had to go out and milk the cow, and he was bound determined he was going to do it, even though my grandmother was the only one that could milk that cow. But Father Emil was going to make it get done. So he goes out there and he tries to milk the cow, and it won't stand still. It won't do anything for him. And he walks out of the barn and he starts thinking, well, what can he do? And he walks back into the house, gets into his mom's closet, takes out her old dress that she always wore to go out and do the chores, found the one bonnet that she always wore, took it out, put the bonnet on his head. He waddles out to the barn and walks up to the cow, and no problem whatsoever. You know, the cow thought it was his mom and got everything done. And that's the way he solved problems. That was his simple way of solving. And how he ended up getting injured in the camp was because he was scrounging around trying to find something, and he found this old crock pot that was kind of down in a hole, and he got down in there and was trying to move it around, and one of the other prisoners of war was trying to help him, and it was a heavy crock pot, and it slipped off to the side, ended up hitting him on the side of the leg, which caused a bruise, which in turn ended up giving him a blood clot. And in the end, he ended up getting pneumonia in there in the camp, and they ended up finally taking him to what they called in North Korea at the camp a hospital, which it absolutely wasn't. And he ended up passing away there in the camp. Well, you know what I really think when I look at how Father Emil lived his life while he was over there fighting. You know, he did everything for the men that were over there. His whole concern was for the men who were there. He fought beside them. You know, he didn't fight beside them as a priest. He didn't fight beside them as a chaplain. He fought beside them as a soldier, and that's what he believed. And he sacrificed himself and his life for what those guys did. And that was his cause. That was his belief, was to help those men and to help those guys get it through, and to help those guys maybe with luck someday get out of there alive and maybe have a better day than what they had. You know, it wasn't about Korea. It was about the men. It was about the boys who came out of that camp and told all the great things that he did, and how much he got them through everything, how much he was the one who made them see that maybe they will get out of there alive. That's what his legacy was about. There was some issues with, as far as when 3 years time goes by to where you're not able to get the award, and that had part of it to do with it. But I look at that whole situation of, the saying of things happen at a right time. There's always a time and place for anything. And I look at how much has been going on and how much interest there has been with Father Emil in these last 10 years. And I look at that and think, there are so many people now who know so much about Father Emil that didn't know about it 15 years ago, that didn't know about it 30 years ago, that do know about it now. And I think it's kind of his way and his life and how he did things of how people are finally taking notice of. And this only exemplifies what he did, only draws more interest into what he did. I mean, for the exceptional person he was, the one thing about Father Emil is, he saw sacrifice as a blessing. Everything he did out of the kindness of his heart and for his fellow man. So everything he did, any sacrifice, was not a hardship for him. It was a blessing for him. No, it was actually Marion, Kansas. The hometown where he grew up is a town called Pilsen, Kansas. It's kind of centrally located in Kansas, a very much the typical small town in Kansas, very deep in roots, very deep in the love for Father Emil, very much the belief in Father Emil. The church, St. John Nepomucene's church, is just this center point of the whole town, and that center point of that church is all around Father Emil. Everything that they believe, and the strength of that town and the community that's there is all centered around Father Emil and what their belief is, and that their belief that someday this would happen, and the joy for them that it finally has. There was just a lot of people talking about it. Like I'd said, with the prisoners of war, they constantly talked about it. They would never stop talking about it. Even if people didn't want to hear, they wouldn't stop talking about it. There have been several books. There's been about 3 books written, and there's a new one that's just getting ready to come out that has detailed his life. And you read the books and all the statements that the POWs made. One of the statements, and I can't remember who made the statement in the book, but one of the statements that was made by one of the POWs was that he saw Father Emil was the type of man that you always wanted your dad to be. And not to put anything against anybody's dad or anything else, but he said Father Emil was always the type of man that you always wanted your dad to be. And that for me was such a profound statement. Oh, yeah. It's, I mean, it just describes everything that he is, and everything that still keeps continuing on with what he is and what he believes. No, I did not. He died in 51, and I was born in 57. But all my knowledge of Father Emil came through my grandmother, who I truly believe was a lot like how Father Emil was. You know, she had the humor that Father had. She had the strength that Father had. She had the belief that Father had. And I got to know my uncle through him, and through my dad as well too. Yes, that is correct. Uh, Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye.